Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Buzzin' Sports channel, and this is another episode of the weekly Waiver Wire with your host Francis from the Buzzin' Sports podcast. Man, this week we had about 4 players go down with hamstring injuries. I don't know if players aren't stretching. I don't know if they're not warming up. But let's just dive into this injury report, and then we'll move on to possible waiver wire pickups and possible players that you can play for your week 4 matchups. First one on the injury list is Christian McCaffrey with a hamstring injury. And pretty much everyone that got a hamstring injury this week is expected to be out for a few weeks. So, McCaffrey, A.J. Brown, Darius Slay, Sterling Shepard all suffered hamstring injuries over the weekend, and they are expected to be out for a few weeks. Scotty Miller from the Bucks, he stepped in for Antonio Brown, but then he suffered a turf toe injury, and he's headed to the IR. Tyler Kroft suffered a rib injury, and James White from the Patriots suffered a hip injury. And there's no definite timeline for those guys, for Scotty Miller, Tyler Kroft, James White. There's not an exact timeline as to how long those guys are going to be out for. But I think that pretty much covers the major injuries over the weekend. And we can move on to the waiver wire pickups. And I got a couple names for each position. Starting with quarterbacks. I really like Heineke, quarterback for Washington versus the Falcons this week. Heineke, he's a gunslinger type of guy, and he's pretty fearless. I like the way he plays. He's not scared to run either. He actually got a rushing touchdown this past weekend. And the past 2 games, he scored 19 fantasy points, and then this past week put up 21. And he does go versus the Falcons. This will be the easiest defense that he has matched up against so far this year. So I do expect a floor of around 20 points for Heineke. I do expect that him and Terry McLaurin are going to have a pretty big day against Atlanta. So that's one possible quarterback play if you're looking for a quarterback this week. Another one is Zach Wilson. I know that's not a very attractive pick, especially the way the past 2 games have gone for him. I started him week 1 for my fantasy team. Luckily, it was for week 1 because he posted 18 points that week. And since then, he's been in the single-digit numbers as far as fantasy points. But when you kind of look back on his schedule, going against Carolina, he went against New England, and then recently went against the Broncos. And those 3 teams, I think when you look back on this season, you can put those 3 teams possibly in the top 10 defenses in the league. He went up against some pretty tough defenses. So I think this matchup this week against the Titans is probably going to be the lightest defense he has faced so far. And week 1, he wasn't a total dud. He put up 18 points. He threw for 2 touchdowns. So Zach Wilson versus the Titans, I think that's a pretty decent gamble if you're looking for a quarterback this week. Moving on to wide receivers. Hunter Renfro from the Raiders has been really active lately. And last week, he was able to put up 18 fantasy points. And through the first 2 weeks, he put up double-digit fantasy points. Week 1, 13 points. Week 2, 10 points. But during both of those weeks, he was missing a touchdown from his stat line. He got his first touchdown last week against Miami, in which he, posted his highest total for fantasy points of the season with 18. So Hunter Renfro, they really trust him in that offense. He's a very slippery guy, so he has a lot of yards after catch. And, looking at him, you wouldn't think that he could be a receiver that could produce a lot, but he's one of those guys that can. That he gets open, catches the ball, and gets yards after the catch. So he's a pretty solid receiver for the Raiders. Next one on the list is Mccaffrey Hardman from the Chiefs. They can't always throw it to Tyreek Hill. They can't always throw it to Kelsey. Eventually teams are going to blanket one or both of those guys. So I think guys like Mccaffrey Hardman, who have a lot of speed and they have that big playability, that they're a great flex play. If you're looking for a flex play, or if you're thin at wide receiver, Mccaffrey Hardman has been posting pretty solid numbers this year. I think his worst game so far was week 1 with 4 points. But week 2, he put up 10 against the Ravens. And then this past week against the Chargers, he had a touchdown, put up a total of 12 fantasy points. So Mccaffrey Hardman, and the Chiefs, they're gonna score points. That's who they are. That offense is explosive. They have Patrick Mahomes. So you can't really go wrong if you're able to get Mccaffrey Hardman or Robinson. Those are pretty solid pickups. All right, I think that's it. Oh, actually, no, we have one more receiver, which is Terrace Marshall Jr. from the Panthers. He is actually a pretty solid target for Sam Darnold. I know Sam Darnold loves DJ Moore, but Terrace Marshall, he's kind of been staying in that 5 to 10 point range per game in fantasy, but through the first 3 weeks, he has not caught a touchdown. And being a guy that's been targeted 14 times through the first 3 weeks, I think eventually he will find the end zone, and he has a matchup against the Cowboys. And then after that, he has a matchup against the Eagles, and then the Vikings, and then the Giants, and then the Falcons. So there's a stretch of games where he has a matchup against pretty soft defenses, and you can't expect the Panthers to be putting up points. So if you'd like to take a chance on Terrace Marshall, or if you're just really thin at wide receiver, that's somebody to consider and look at. Let's see. I think that is going to wrap it up for the wide receivers now. Moving on to the running backs, there are 2 names that I really like this week. One is the backup to McCaffrey, since we can expect McCaffrey to be out for the next few games. And it's Chuba Hubbard. I think that's how you say his first name, Chuba, or Chuba. Last name Hubbard. But he is apparently a rookie this week. And he did go in when McCaffrey went down, and he looks like a pretty good runner. He looks like he is going to be someone that can produce for that team. He didn't have a touchdown this past week, but he was still able to grind out 10 fantasy points. So if you were to throw in, a touchdown, he could very much get anywhere from 15 to 20 points. And he does play the Cowboys next. So Chuba Hubbard's probably, he's probably going to be one of the most sought after running backs this week. So if you're in a good position on the wire to get him, I recommend making him your priority. If you can't get to him, there's another guy who's been chilling on the wire, who's been posting up pretty solid numbers, and that's Zach Moss. He didn't play week 1, but for the past 2 weeks, he has a total combined fantasy points of 32. And he posted 14 points week 2, 18 points this past week. And for the week 4 matchup, it is against Houston. So Zach Moss, a guy that, he didn't get to start week 1, but the last 2 games he has gotten the start, and he has posted very solid fantasy numbers. So he's going against pretty much the easiest defense so far that he's had to play against in the Houston Texans. And actually, the Texans defense isn't terrible, but I definitely don't consider them anything like a top 10 or top 15. So I think Zach Moss should at least get 1 rushing touchdown versus the Texans. The Bills definitely should have a lot of red zone trips and a lot of opportunities to score. So Zach Moss, you should at least get a touchdown. Hopefully, right? Watch me be super wrong. He's going to get like 2 points. All right. Moving on to tight ends. 2 names on this list. One is Dan Schultz from the Cowboys. And he's another one of those guys where he doesn't really jump out at you, but hey, he runs his routes. He catches his balls. Dak Prescott likes him, trusts him, and he's been their main tight end. Blake Jarwin had a major injury last year, and he's barely coming back from that, but Dan Schultz has shown that he's a very reliable tight end. He can do it all. And he's actually really good at route running and pass catching. So what did he post this past week? I know he had a pretty big game against the Eagles last night, but let me check. He put 26 fantasy points last night against the Eagles. And then week 1, he was in the double digits again with 10 points. Week 2 against the Chargers, which was a very ugly game. It was very penalty heavy on both sides. So there wasn't really a flow in that game. And he only had 3 points. But for the next 2 games, he goes up against the Panthers and the Giants. And he's getting his targets. 20 total targets so far through 3 games. So it averages around 6.5. It's pretty solid if you're looking for a tight end to fill in this week. Let me see. Who's the other guy? Dawson Knox. So Dawson Knox had his best performance in fantasy this past week. He caught a touchdown. He was 4 or 5, 49 yards, and a touchdown for 14 points. Week 1, he put up 8 points. Week 2, he put up 9 points. Honestly, looking at his history through the first 3 weeks, he is one of the more solid picks off the wire, especially if you're in a standard 12-man PPR league. Guys like D-Knox are going to be there, Schultz, and they're guys that are producing. They're not, laying an egg, and they are seeing targets from their quarterback. So I think those 2 guys are very solid. One third name to mention real quick is Evan Ingram from the Giants. I'm not a fan of this team. I think this team has a lot of problems, but Evan Ingram did just come back this past week against the Falcons. It was his first game back. He missed the previous 2 games. So there are better days ahead of Evan Ingram. He only posted about 2 points this past week, but he is going to have better games moving forward. If you need somebody to just kind of hold on to, you have space for an extra player, and you need a tight end, Evan Ingram, just keep him on your bench, and I think moving forward, you're going to see his usage go up. All right, and now that we're done with tight ends, we can move on to defenses. There's only one defense on this list that I picked. I really like the Bengals defense versus the Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence, I get it. He's a rookie. He's having an okay showing, but he's throwing a lot of picks. He's throwing a lot of interceptions, and it's probably, not all his fault. He doesn't really have a ton of time to scan the field and make a perfect throw. That O-line isn't top 5 or anything. But he, that's just the situation he's in, and I think the Bengals defense has improved over the years. Like this is the first time they've shown that they're actually kind of solid on defense. And going against a rookie quarterback who has been turning over the ball a lot, I think the Bengals defense is primed for a pretty solid game. I could see them getting anywhere from 10 to 15 points off sacks, interceptions, fumbles. Hopefully they can score a touchdown off of one of those turnovers, but I just don't see the Jaguars going through a full NFL game all 4 quarters without a single turnover. Like you couldn't convince me that they could do that. So Bengals defense, they should capitalize on some turnovers this week. And as far as kickers, I really did not get any any kickers on to this list or get any kickers in mind or ready, because I'm just scanning the wire, and honestly, I can't even recommend anything. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys. You guys pick your kickers. You guys take your chances with your kickers. I'm over kickers this year. I've through the first 3 weeks, I've seen enough from kickers. So this is pretty much going to wrap it for this week's weekly waiver wire report. One of these days, I'm going to say weekly waiver wire report. But anyway, thank you for tuning in. This has been your host, Francis, from the Buds and Sports Podcast. And please tune in next week to get your weekly waiver wire report. I'll see you for week 4. Peace.